Dan, I look at the desire for a cheap electric car. Everyone else has the same desire. I'll leave it up to you, Nissan, et cetera, et cetera. Isn't he competing at the low price point with 5, 6, 7, 8 other vehicles?
Look, I mean, no doubt to hit the masses, you need a sub 30K vehicle. I think what Musk showed yesterday in the Tesla Vision is from a production and scale, and they're in Mexico, batteries that I believe could come down 30, 40%. They're now going to be able to hit those and hit the masses. And I think ultimately it's a flex the muscles moment for Tesla, especially with a lot of the industry stumbling.
Okay, well, this is fine, but as John mentioned, and I saw a stream of disappointment over this investor day. There was a stream about the Goldman Sachs investor day, but it was nothing. What was your take on two guys in black T-shirts up with mics given an investor's day? I mean, I don't get it.
Yeah, look, I think these investors, look, we've seen it with Apple and Cupertino. You tend to come out wanting more meat on the bone. I think for Tesla, as we've seen before, they lay out the foundation, sometimes don't unveil the actual vehicle. And they talked about 2 new vehicles coming out, but the last thing they want to do is sort of, get ahead of this. I think this is something that will be probably a separate event. But I think the foundation to get to 3 to 5 million vehicles and eventually 20 million, it's there. And I think ultimately that's why, I believe along with Apple, the most transformational companies in the market.
Dan, there's been a lot of narrative about how companies are moving their supply chain out of China, including Elon Musk, despite some of his rhetoric supporting the cause in China and supporting his business there. How much credence do you put into this? Is this just anecdotal, specific incidents that don't really move the dial? Or is there a seismic shift out of China to insulate some of these companies from the geopolitical risk?
Yeah, look, normally it's smoke and mirror type beltway talk. I think this is real. In terms of Inflation Reduction Act, there's a real incentive from a tax perspective. That's why you're seeing more and more of a build out in around Austin. I think you'll see more of a build out in Fremont as well. But we're seeing it across tech. I think you're going to see more come to the U.S. But no doubt, right now, and it is for, called the next 3 to 5 years, China is going to continue to be the hearts and lungs of the supply chain. And I think Tesla is just really sort of balancing between China and non-China. That's why you're seeing that build out now in Mexico as well.
Dan, how do you game out the market risk tied to the presence of a lot of these tech companies? And I'm including Tesla in that loosely because it could be an industrial company. How do you include the risk of increasing geopolitical tensions between the U.S. and China, disrupting supply chains, forcing a more rapid shift in some sort of supply chain issue earlier that would cause some of the margins to compress?
I mean, look, just to put it in context, Apple, if they went full in and wanted to move production out of China, best case in the next 3 years, they can move 5% of production out of China. I mean, this is such the hearts and lungs, almost cemented. So it's something where it would take a long time to start to move 5, 10% of production. That's why the reality, and we saw it with Tesla and Apple in terms of the zero COVID issues in December, I mean, really at the mercy of China and Beijing for now, although slowly moving, in the opposite direction.
Dan, what were your February channel checks on various and sundry tech names?
I mean, it's holding up much, much better than feared. I mean, even coming out of Asia, not seeing any sort of supply chain cuts for iPhone, which I think is important.
Right.
And I think what you saw from Salesforce and across the board, this is not necessarily the minute that yell fire in a crowded theater in terms of what we're seeing.
Dan, it'd be a crowded theater for some of the parts analysis from you on Apple. Somebody asked on the show the other day some of the parts, and I said I really don't know because nobody wants to mention how high that the 3, 2, 1 statistic is. Apple, $150 a share. What's the sum of the parts?
I mean, some of the parts, bull case gets you to 225 to 240, base case 200. I think the big thing is the services business. I think that's a permanent re-rating that we see there. And now when you start to see more and more, especially with the next iPhone, and you have 25% of the base that have not upgraded, I think there's a stock that's going to have a 2 in front of it this year, despite the macro, and obviously many, negative
Well,
on tech.
Where's the two come from in the numerator and the denominator? Just PE or price to cash flow or price to record share buybacks? What drives it over 200?
I mean, it's really services. I believe it's 1.3 to 1.4 trillion. Of course, you have the franchise hardware business, and then you start to look at the capital allocation program. I mean, that's what drives you anywhere from that low to mid 2 level in terms of where I see the stock going.
Dan, just to finish on Tesla, if yesterday was so good, why is the stock down 6%?
I think it's just a typical sell in the news. Street always wants more. Stock sells off. The haters come out. But ultimately, in terms of the path, in terms of record deliveries, where they're playing, I think this is more flex the muscles more. We be buying on the sell-off coming out of these events.
What about the Cybertruck, Dan? What's happening with that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think this is something where by the end of this year, you're going to see ultimate deliveries come out in production, and it's important. And that's why I think this ultimately lays the groundwork for what we see as the next vehicle, from the Tesla ecosystem.
Did you get enough from them yesterday on that release?
I felt yesterday they basically doubled down to that target's going to continue to be there. It's not going the goalposts are not going to get moved out further. I think a year from now, you're driving around Manhattan and you see Cybertrucks.